Okay, folks, good evening. We're on. Okay. Right, I'm assuming the sound is okay, right? Okay, so one of the stories that is told in the Torah, in the one of the biblical stories. Now, just as a general rule, of course, the events that occurred in the lives of the people who are spoken about in the Torah, in the biblical accounts of Genesis and so on and so forth, and Exodus and Bereshit and Shmois and so on. All of the events that are told there are, of course, of critical importance. Now, there were many more events that took place which are, in fact, not recorded. And the reason that they're not recorded is because they didn't have any, although they obviously happened, but they didn't have any message for future generations. So the sages tell us that anything that is recorded, therefore, is a message for future generations, and has to be learned and studied and understood in terms of the message that it's going to give us. And message is not just about a historical event, how it happened, why it happened, etc. But the message is a much broader one. Usually, has to do with how we perceive ourselves, how we move forward in the world, and so on and so forth. And exactly this case is the story in this week's Torah reading, which is the section called Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha literally translated means go towards yourself. But it's the instruction that God gives Avraham, to leave the place where he is, where he's living with his family, with his wife, and with his father, and with his brother, and so on. Go from your land, from the place that you were born, from the house of your father, and go towards a land which I will show you. And God tells him that this land is going to be the land of his inheritance, and there's a whole explanation and story of exactly how this is transmitted, that this is going to be the land which is going to be the land in which godliness is apparent, and in which the revelation of godliness is endemic to the place itself. In other words, it's a completely natural thing. There's much less resistance in that land to the revelation of godliness. It's the land, it's as everybody calls it in modern terminology, the Holy Land. The land, in other words, where holiness is at home, where holiness can be revealed much more easily than anywhere else. So Abraham is told by God, go to that land. And so what does he do? Of course, he packs up his all of his possessions, his household, and so on. And off he goes. He goes to the land of Israel, which was at that time called the land of Canaan. But when he gets there, as we know, there was a famine. And the famine was so bad that he was forced to leave the Holy Land, forced to leave the land of Israel, and go down to Egypt. Now, just think for a minute. Abraham has been promised by God that he is going to give him this land, the Holy Land, a place where holiness is easy to attain, where the revelation of godliness is sort of baked into the cake over there. It's there. It's the place where the future temple will be built, where the Shekhinah, where the divine presence is revealed and will be revealed in the future. This is a land which, when Abraham is going towards it, he has tremendous anticipation of what he's going to see when he gets there, and what he's going to experience, and so on and so forth. And he goes with this tremendous hope, and this tremendous hope for the future, not just the future of his own family, but the future really of mankind. because he's already been told that he's Av Hamon Goyim, he's going to be the father of many nations. In other words, he's going to be the paradigm for that nations are going to follow the spiritual paradigm that shows what a person ideally should look like, how he should worship God, how he should serve God, how he should help his fellow man, how he should be righteous in everything that he does, how he should react to adversity, and so on and so forth. So after suffering a number of different trials and tribulations and difficulties and attempts on his life, Abraham eventually goes to the Holy Land. He goes to the land of Israel. And immediately he gets there, there's a famine. And he has to leave the land of Israel and has to go down to Egypt. Now, Egypt, by contrast, is called in biblical terminology, it's called Ervas Haaretz, the most promiscuous place on earth. Completely the opposite of what Abraham had managed to achieve. The opposite of promiscuity. He was married and very happily married, but he had not fallen prey to the promiscuity of the age. Now, promiscuity is a problem in any age, if the truth be told, but Egypt was a prime example of, the nightlife of Egypt was probably equal to what you could see in the nightlife of certain cities around the globe, unfortunately, and it was very bad. It was called, the most promiscuous place on earth. So Abraham going down there knows that he's heading towards trouble. What can he do? There's a famine. There's no food there's no food in the land of Israel. So he goes down, and interestingly enough, he goes down to Egypt without questioning God at all. He goes up to the land of Israel. This is the land that he's been promised. The land that he's been promised for himself and his descendants, basically forever. And as soon as he gets there, he has to leave. And he has to move somewhere else. He has to go down, and not just somewhere else, but down to the most awful, promiscuous, licentious, and immoral place on earth. That's where he's told he has to go, to such an extent that he has to pretend that Sarah is not even his wife, because he's so worried about what's going to happen when they see Sarah, who was a beautiful woman. He was afraid, and he had reason to fear, that they would kill him and take her to the Pharaoh, which is in fact what they had plotted to do, except they didn't need to kill him because he wasn't her husband. Even the Pharaoh at that time would not have taken a woman who was married. But if she wasn't married, he would take her. In any event, nothing happened between them because he was struck by plagues as soon as he tried to do anything. All right, let's not go there. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the whole purpose of God telling him to go to the land of Israel? Now's the time. Go up, leave your land and go up to the land that I'm going to show you. And he shows him the land of Israel, and he walks the length and breadth of the land. And he's inspired, and it's this beautiful place, and this place that he can sense that this is where godliness is revealed and can be revealed to the greatest extent possible on earth. And then shortly afterwards, he has to leave and go down to Egypt. What on earth is going on over here? And he doesn't say anything. He just accepts that that's the way it is, and on he moves. What is going on over here? So, the Kabbalists use a phrase that is called Yerida Tzorech Aliyah, a descent for the sake of an ascent. That is what the whole concept of leaving the Holy Land to go down to the land of Egypt was all about. It was an ascent. It was a descent in order to ascend to a higher place afterwards. Now, let's speak about it in terms of somewhat more Kabbalistic terms, like what was really going on over here. In the land of Israel, which is a land that is natural to holiness, one's service of God in such a land, in such a situation, is to a certain extent incomplete. It's incomplete even though it's much easier. In other words, we're talking about circumstances where the living is easy, you know, where spiritual living is easy, where spiritual living doesn't come with a tremendous amount of effort, it doesn't come with a tremendous amount of self-sacrifice, it doesn't come with a tremendous amount of struggling against evil, struggling against temptation, struggling against depression, struggling against whatever it may happen to be that people struggle with. Things are easy. Things were easy over there. Things were, it was a land which was, as we said before, imbued with holiness from the time that it was created. And it was a place where it was easy to access holiness. So Abraham is told, Abraham is given this instruction, go up to that place, experience it for a certain period of time, but then you're going to have to go and go down to the lowest place on earth, lowest not geographically, but lowest morally, the lowest place on earth, Egypt, and do whatever has to be done over there in order to bring the goodness that there is in Egypt back into the Holy Land. Now, let me just explain what this means Kabbalistically. As we know, right at the beginning of creation, there was another, actually prior to the creation of the world as we know it, prior to the creation of the world as we have it now, there was the world, what was called the world of Tohu, the world of chaos. It was a world of darkness, spiritual darkness. It was a world that preceded this creation, but was created in such a way that it would fall apart, would disintegrate. And would disintegrate in order to be reintegrated into holiness on a much higher level. It was a world in which there was tremendous potential, but that potential had to be absorbed into a more stable world, and then revealed as the potential that existed. To put it in more Kabbalistic terms, in more technical terms, the world of Tohu, which existed before the world of Tikkun, the worlds of Tikkun and what we live in now, the worlds that were rectified from that world, from that broken world. So that broken world, the world of Tohu, smashed apart because there was too much energy, there was too much light. It was like a nervous breakdown kind of a situation, right? You could probably parallel a nervous breakdown to the shattering of the vessels of Tohu. In other words, it was a tremendous, in technical Kabbalistic terms, it was a tremendous emotional upheaval. The vessels that broke were the vessels of the emotions, the emotional sphirot. Only the 7 lowest sphirot, not the 3 highest sphirot, but the 7 lowest sphirot, were actually damaged, broken apart by the smashing of the vessels of Tohu. It was an emotional falling apart. In a sense, like a sort of a nervous breakdown. Now, what happened to all that potential? What happened to all the light that was invested in the world of Tohu? Now, by the way, this was done deliberately. It wasn't done as a mistake, that God made a mistake. No, he did it deliberately because, as I pointed out in previous classes, the world of Tohu was built in order to be destroyed, in order to be rebuilt. So God built it in order that it would be destroyed. It was destroyed because there was too much energy for the immature vessels of the world of Tohu. Those vessels shattered and fell apart. And subsequently, through the work of the world of Tikkun, those vessels are put back together, and the light is once more elicited and brought down back into those vessels. But now the vessels are strengthened, but not in and of themselves, but because of what it is that we do here down below. In other words, God didn't want the world that we have now to exist without earning something. the godliness has to be earned. So when Abraham went down, when Abraham was sent down, when he went up to the land of Israel, that was going up to the land where it was as if before the shattered vessels. He was going up to that level before the vessels had become shattered, before the breaking of the vessels of the world of Tohu, before the Shvirat HaKelim, as it's called. He went up to that level, experienced it, and then had to go down into the world where the broken vessels lay. In other words, where the sparks of holiness of the world of Tohu had fallen, and his duty was to go down there and extract whatever it is that he could and bring it back into holiness. What was the purpose of that? The sages tell us, Ma'aseh Avois Siman Labanim. What the Avois did and what the forefathers, in other words, the forefathers of the nation are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. What they did, their children also had to do. The same exact thing had to happen with the Jewish people who went down to Egypt. Right? Jacob was living in the land afterwards, after Abraham returned to the land of Israel. So he was living there, and Isaac lived there, and then Jacob lived there. And then came the whole story with Joseph, when Joseph went down to Egypt, and then everyone had to go down again because of a famine. They had to go down to Egypt to survive, the 7 years of famine, the 7 years of plenty, then the 7 years of famine. They also went down to Egypt, and then they were enslaved in Egypt, and they remained there for 210 years, even though the period of time was supposed to be 400 years, but they stayed there for 210 years, and the reason for that amount of time was that the tikkun that they did was so intense that they didn't have to spend the entire 400 years there. In any event, they spent all that time in Egypt, and then they came out again back to the land of Israel, bringing with them all the rechush, all the wealth. In other words, the holy sparks that had fallen into the land of Egypt, they brought back with them. But they were preceded by Abraham, who started the work. Ma'aseh Avois Siman Labanim, what the forefathers did is a sign for their children that they will also have to do, and have to do more intensely. What Abraham did in the short time that he was in Egypt, wasn't a very extended period of time, the amount of time that he was in Egypt, he managed to begin the process of the elevation of sparks and take them back into the Holy Land, to raise them up again, to raise up these sparks of holiness that had fallen and become embedded within creation in Egypt, in Ervas Haaretz, in the most promiscuous place in the world, and elevate some of them and bring them back to the land. And it says, therefore, that when he returned to the land, he was very heavily endowed with flocks and with wealth and with so on and so forth. Now, it's explained in Kabbalah that the flocks and the wealth, although they meant literally, they also meant figuratively. In other words, the possessions that he now came back with to the land of Israel, which he didn't have before, those possessions were really the possession of the sparks of holiness that he managed to extract from Egypt and take back to the Holy Land. So, therefore, the message that Abraham was given was, don't be afraid to go down into what in the verse is called to go down into death. In other words, to go down into that place where godliness is not revealed, the darkness, into the erva, into the promiscuity and the uncleanliness of Egypt. Don't worry about going down there, because the purpose is ultimately to ascend once again. Don't worry about the descent, because the ascent is the ultimate purpose. The descent itself is only a step on the way to the ascent. But sometimes it's necessary to descend in order to ascend and to ascend to a higher level. So that was the message that Abraham was given, and that's the message that he imparts to us. That don't be afraid to go down from your level of holiness and become involved with the world in order to elevate and purify the world around you. But of course, one has to maintain that idea. One has to keep that idea in mind, that the purpose of the descent is to ascend to a higher level. If you just simply ascend to where you were before, then you might as well have not gone in the first place. In any event, that's what Abraham did. Now, this whole idea is paralleled by the descent of the soul. Abraham, in many Kabbalistic writings, Abraham represents the soul altogether. Sarah actually represents the body, but Abraham represents the soul. And the soul is told, Lecha Chama, go from your holy land up above, in the higher worlds where the soul resides, before its birth into a body in this world. Leave that holy place, the holy abode up above, and descend into the world. And don't be afraid of the descent. Yes, the descent is a descent, but nevertheless, the purpose of the descent is ascent. Keep that in mind. Work on the ascending in whatever state of descent you are in. Work on elevating and ascending and purifying and making more holy all that which is around you. That was the message that Abraham was given, and that's the message of the descent of the soul. We come into this world, and sometimes some people have to struggle far more than others, as I'm sure you're aware. Some people have to struggle constantly with negative events in their lives, with negative thoughts, with negative impulses, and so on and so forth. Now, dealing with the negative impulses and dealing with the negative thoughts and dealing with the negative atmosphere and environment that's around us, the way to deal with it is, as we've pointed out on many occasions, is not to fight the evil in itself, but to enhance the good. Once one enhances the good, all the good that's buried within the evil sort of gets attracted to it like a magnet, right? It gets attracted like a magnet towards the good and begins to increase it. What do I mean by that? So basically, people struggle in their everyday lives with challenges. Everybody has challenges. It's not, there's probably not a person alive who has never had any challenges and doesn't have challenges perhaps on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. Everybody has challenges. The question is, how are you going to approach those challenges? Are those challenges opportunities for me to ascend to a higher level? In other words, when you jump over a barrier, when you jump over a wall, you go higher than the wall, right? In order to, of course, you could go around the wall, you could dig under the wall, but you could jump over it, right? You could jump over the barrier. So obviously the attitude is to jump over the barrier. Now, what does that mean in terms of the world of tikkun and the world of tohu, the world of rectification and the world that fell apart and smashed? So the way of tikkun is to work with the light, not to work with the darkness. We don't try and push away the darkness. We try and elicit more and more light, bring more and more light into the world. How do we do that? There's an interesting midrash. That midrash is midrashic literature, rabbinic literature, that explains that Abraham fulfilled the entire Torah before it was given. He fulfilled the entire Torah before it was given. Now, one of the explanations of that is as follows. The Maggid Mezrich, the successor to the Baal Shem Tov, explains it as follows. He asked the question, how is it possible that Abraham could have kept the entire Torah before it was given? How did he know what the Torah would contain? How did he know what all the mitzvot were, what all the commandments would be? They hadn't been given yet. So he answers that he was given one commandment. He was given the commandment of circumcision, of Brit Milah, circumcision. So he goes on to explain, the Maggid Mezrich goes on to explain that when a person does the one mitzvah, the one commandment that they were given, even if they were only given one commandment, and we've all been given many more than one commandment, but if you're given one commandment even, and you do that to the fullest possible level, with the greatest intensity, with the greatest devotion, with the greatest self-sacrifice. All of the Torah is contained within that one mitzvah. Why? Let me explain it like this. There's a rule that a person who is occupied with a particular mitzvah, with a particular commandment, is exempt from doing any of the other commandments. The classic example that's given is, let's say a person is, it's during the holiday of Sukkot, when you're supposed to dwell in booths for 7 days, in these Sukkot in a booth, covered by leaves and so on, and branches on top. And you're supposed to dwell in that for 7 days. Now, what if someone is occupied at that point in time with Pidyon Shvuim? Pidyon Shvuim means redeeming captives, who were taken captive by the enemy or by kidnappers or whatever it is for a ransom. So redeeming captives means that you have to go to where the person is held in captivity, to where the robbers are, to the kidnappers or whatever, to this other country perhaps, where they're kept in captivity. And redeeming captives is itself a mitzvah. So if you're occupied with redeeming captives, you're exempt from doing any other mitzvah. Why are you exempt? Since you're occupied with one, you can't be doing another one at the same time. You can't be demanding from you that you reside in a booth. What, are you going to carry it with you? Carry this booth with you so that you can use it when you stop to rest or whatever it is. No, you're not obligated in that particular commandment of sukkah when you're busy with another mitzvah of pidyon shvuim, of redeeming a captive. So one of the commentaries, the Rogachova Gaon, Rabbi Yosef Ruzin. So he explains it slightly differently. He says like this: it's not that you're exempt from doing the other mitzvah, that you're simply exempt from it because you can't do two things at the same time. He says, no, when you're doing the thing that you're doing the other things as well. You're doing everything else as well. So the Magen Mezrich, on basis that they use the same principle to explain that although Abraham had only one mitzvah, the mitzvah of Brit Milah, circumcision, since he did that mitzvah with so much devotion and so much care and so much love for God, and so he was an old man when he did it. It was very painful and very difficult and very dangerous and so on. But he did it with such devotion that it was as if he was fulfilling all of the other commandments of the Torah. So therefore, when a person has one thing that they have to fulfill now, whatever it may happen to be, one of the commandments of the Torah, whichever one, it could be the commandment of charity, it could be the commandment of prayer, whatever it may happen to be. But he does that, and he does that fully, he does it with devotion, and he does it, puts himself into it completely. All of the Torah is in his hand. Everything is there. So therefore, when a person is faced with challenges, and the challenges could be simply that the world is not a conducive place for a lifestyle that the Torah demands, a lifestyle of Torah and mitzvot, of the Torah and its commandments, and yet one hangs on to those things which one can do or one is doing, and does them fully and with devotion and properly and to the best of your ability, even though you're not perhaps doing everything. All of the Torah is there. All of the rectification is happening at that point in time. Yes, when another opportunity comes, you'll take the other opportunity also. But by using this opportunity out now to the fullest, that therefore incorporates everything that could possibly be done if you're doing what you're doing now to the fullest extent of your capabilities. Now, the same is true not only of Abraham, but the same is true of us living in the world. When a person is faced with challenges and he has something, yeah, there you go. That's a very nice way of putting it, Terry. One candle lit with a full heart of God is worth 1,000 lit without. In other words, do it with devotion, do it with concentration. Whatever it is that you do properly. There was a certain sage who was known to be very devout in his various practices, And someone asked, what was his favorite thing to do? Like, what was it that his favorite thing was, that his favorite mitzvah, his favorite commandment? Like, what was it? So he's the son of this man who had passed away. He said, whatever he happened to be doing at that moment, whatever he happened to be doing at that moment, he did it completely. He did it with complete devotion. He did it not thinking about what am I doing tomorrow, or what's going to happen after this, and what am I, what about my living, and what about whatever. What he did with completeness. He did with fullness. He put himself into it totally. And therefore, at any moment, whatever it was that he was doing was the thing that he was most devoted to. And that's really the way it is. If we take it that what comes to you is what it is that you have to do, and you do it without saying, well, I can't do this now because I have to do something else. If you do what you have to do now and you're busy involved with this thing, you do it to the full extent, you have everything contained therein. And that's really, I think, the lesson that Abraham teaches us here. What he was doing, he did fully. He was fully invested in everything that he was doing. And even though it might not have been the entire gamut of laws of the Torah, but the one that he had, he did with devotion. Whatever it was that he was doing at that time, he did with all his heart and all his soul. And that's what's required of us. As it says in the prayer, when we say the Shema prayer, the prayer expressing the unity of God, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. So it says, after that, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, love the Lord your God, B'chol levavecha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol meidecha, with all your heart, with all your might, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. In other words, with everything that you got, put everything into it. And if we just put our efforts into something, into doing a good deed, into a charitable act, going to visit someone in the hospital, and put yourself into it. This is your gate to heaven. Right at this moment in time, because you have this opportunity to go to heaven, because you have this opportunity to do a kind deed for somebody else, to say a kind word, to help somebody out, to pray, to fulfill a particular mitzvah commandment. Now, at this point in time, if we do it and we put ourselves into it completely, then all of it is what we have, and then that's really the ascent that comes after the descent. Yes, sometimes we have to descend. Sometimes we're forced into situations where we have to deal with a very crass and gross world out there. But the purpose of it is to elevate it and to do it fully, and to do it with full power, and with the intention of elevating and bringing everything back to a higher level, and then ultimately the higher level will happen.